In the world of high-stakes commerce, few things are as visceral or as lucrative as a slab of seared protein. In Australia, the steakhouse isn't just a restaurant, it's a secular cathedral. It is where we celebrate the closing of $1 million deal, where we mark the transition to adulthood, and where we pay homage to a national identity built on the backs of cattle and the grit of the Outback. From the neon-lit chains of the suburbs to the wood-fired white tablecloth temples of Sydney and Melbourne, the Australian steakhouse industry is a multi-billion-dollar machine. But behind the sizzle and the scent of ironbark smoke lies a narrative far more complex than the paddock-to-plate fairy tale sold on the menu. Beneath the perfectly charred crust of that $120 Wagyu ribeye is a world of calculated artifice, brutal efficiency, and a legacy of scandals that the industry would prefer you to forget. Welcome to the dark side of the grill. This is the truth about what's actually happening in the kitchens and boardrooms of the nation's most iconic institutions. This is 7 Australian steakhouses exposed. 1. The Great American Mirage, Outback Steakhouse.
Guess what? We took everything you love about the bloomin' onion and created a menu you've never seen before.
Let me hear you say, Bloom that ass! Bloom that ass!
If you walk into an Outback Steakhouse in Florida, you'll see boomerangs on the walls and menus filled with kookaburra wings and Alice Springs chicken. It is a multi-billion-dollar empire built entirely on the aesthetic of the Australian Down Under. Yet for decades, this global giant has faced a humiliating paradox. It cannot survive in Australia. The exposure here isn't about food safety. It's about the death of a brand that tried to sell a caricature back to its source. Outback Steakhouse was founded in 1988 by 4 Americans in Tampa who had never even set foot in Australia. They didn't want to create an authentic experience. They wanted to capitalize on the Crocodile Dundee fever sweeping the West. When they finally attempted to conquer the Australian market, the results were disastrous. Australians didn't see a taste of home. They saw a bizarre plastic simulation of their own culture. The famous bloomin' onion, a deep-fried calorie bomb that serves as the brand's mascot, is practically non-existent in actual Australian culinary tradition. In Australia, the brand has become a ghost, with many locals unaware it even exists, and those who do often viewing it as a punchline. It exposed the ultimate corporate hubris, the belief that a marketing-driven identity can replace the soul of a cuisine. In the Australian market, where steak is a matter of national pride, the plastic boomerangs of Outback weren't just inauthentic, they were an insult. Stay to the end for the meatiest truth. 2. The Rockpool Reckoning, high-end wage theft.
The federal government has confirmed that potentially dangerous E. coli has been detected in 3 shipments of Australian beef exported to South Carolina in the United States. The ABC's Lateline has learned that up to 13 meat shipments have also been rejected by US authorities in the past 12 months because they contained feces and veterinary drug residues. Last year, the government introduced a new export meat inspection system, which critics say relies too heavily on self-regulation.
If Outback is the bottom-tier caricature, Rockpool Bar and Grill is the billionaire's playground. Founded by celebrity chef Neil Perry and later sold to Quadrant Private Equity, this brand represents the pinnacle of Australian luxury. But the exposure here was far from glamorous. In a series of investigations that rocked the industry, the Rockpool Dining Group, now Hunter Street Hospitality, was exposed for systemic wage theft. While diners paid hundreds of dollars for elite cuts of Cape Grim beef, primary staff were found to be working up to 70 hours a week, with some migrant workers earning as little as half the minimum award rate. It revealed the private equity trap. When a luxury brand is bought by a fund, the pressure to maintain 30% profit margins often comes at the cost of the very people cooking the meat. 3. The Squires Loft monopoly. The secret-based. Walk into a Squires Loft anywhere from Melbourne to Perth, and you will find an identical experience. Known as the Steak Specialists, this brand is the silent titan of the industry. The exposure here isn't about scandal, but about the industrialization of the artisan. Squires Loft operates with the efficiency of a high-end franchise, relying on a proprietary-based and custom-built grills that ensure a uniform taste across all 17-plus locations. While they market the Gippsland grass-fed romance, their success is actually built on a dedicated production facility that pre-portions and wet ages their meat for exactly 28 days. It is the McDonaldization of the premium steak, proving that in the steakhouse business, predictability is more profitable than individual chef creativity. 4. Hog's Breath Cafe, the death of the slow-cooked era. Once the undisputed king of the casual suburban steakhouse, Hog's Breath Cafe and its 18-hour slow-cooked prime rib have faced a brutal reckoning. From a peak of over 80 locations, the brand has seen dozens of closures, with many franchises falling into liquidation, owing hundreds of thousands to the ATO. The exposure here is the obsolescence of the gimmick. As Australian diners became more educated about Wagyu grading and dry aging, the Hog's Breath model of tenderized commodity beef lost its luster. Their struggle reveals the life cycle of a hype-based business. When the public's palate evolved toward cleaner flames and better fats, the Hog found itself stuck in a bygone era of 1990s marketing. 5. The Entrecôte illusion, the bottomless margin and In Melbourne, Entrecôte turned the steakhouse model on its head by offering only one main course, steak frite with a secret sauce. This is a masterclass in the magnate's strategy of inventory control. By limiting the menu to a single cut, the porterhouse, the restaurant virtually eliminates food waste, the silent killer of hospitality. The exposure is the psychological trick. They sell you a Parisian dream, with bottomless fries to distract from the fact that they have optimized the most efficient, high-margin kitchen operation in the city. You aren't just paying for steak, you're paying for the efficiency of a business that has solved the riddle of overheads. 6. The Meat and Wine Company, the global syndicate. With its Afrocentric design and high-rise locations, the Meat and Wine Company looks like a boutique powerhouse. However, the exposed truth is its role as the final link in a globalized meat industrial complex. The brand is part of the Seagrass Hospitality Group and relies on its exclusive Monte Beef program. While the menu speaks of hand-selected farms, Monte is a massive, vertically integrated supply chain. This isn't a small-scale farm story, it is a logistics operation that ensures a steak in Sydney tastes exactly like one in London or Dubai. The artisan feel is a carefully curated skin on a global corporate skeleton. 7. Vlado's, the anti-marketing marketing. Finally, we have Vlado's Charcoal Grill in Melbourne. For 60 years, this institution has operated without a single commercial advertisement. There is no menu, just a set 4-course meat journey. The exposure at Vlado's is the power of the legacy brand. By refusing to change their decor since 1964 or offer a la carte options, they have created a mystique that marketers would kill for. While other steakhouses spend millions on branding, Vlado's proves that uncompromising stubbornness is its own form of high-stakes commerce. In an industry obsessed with the next trend, the oldest player in the game stays on top by simply refusing to play the game at all. The industrialization of the artisan, the great irony of the modern Australian steakhouse is that as the price on the menu climbs, the process often becomes more automated. We are sold a dream of a lone chef, hand-selecting a carcass at dawn, but the reality is a logistical masterpiece of data and cold chain management. The exclusive beef you're eating is tracked via satellite, graded by laser scanning technology, and moved through a supply chain so efficient it would make a Silicon Valley tech giant weep with envy. The exposure here is the commodification of the unique. When a restaurant tells you their beef is sourced from a single farm in the Gippsland, they are often omitting the fact that that farm is part of a corporate conglomerate owning hundreds of thousands of hectares. The romance of the small-scale producer is the fuel that runs the marketing engine, but the engine itself is a cold, hard, industrial machine designed for maximum yield. The psychology of the high-stakes menu. The architecture of a steakhouse menu is a psychological minefield. Notice how the most expensive item, perhaps a $450 tomahawk, is placed at the very top. This isn't necessarily because they expect to sell 100 of them a night. It's an anchor. By establishing a $400 price point, the $95 ribeye suddenly feels like a reasonable middle ground option. This is the magnate's strategy in action, controlling the perception of value. Steakhouses are among the few places where upselling is considered part of the charm. The side dishes, the $18 truffle mash or the $15 charred broccolini, carry profit margins that would make a software company blush. While the steak itself might have a food cost of 35 to 40%, the sides often cost the kitchen cents to produce. You aren't just buying dinner, you're participating in a carefully choreographed financial extraction. The environmental reckoning. For decades, the Australian beef industry has operated with a sense of untouchable swagger. It is a cornerstone of the economy, a symbol of national identity. But the shadows are lengthening. As global pressure mounts regarding methane emissions and land clearing, the exposure facing the industry is no longer about what's on the plate, but the footprint left behind to put it there. We see carbon neutral beef appearing on premium menus, but the transparency of these offsets is often murky. The industry is in a race against time to redefine itself before the narrative shifts from national icon to environmental liability. The smart money, the real magnates behind the scenes, are already pivoting, investing in seaweed-based feeds and regenerative practices, not just out of the goodness of their hearts, but because they know that in the 21st century, sustainability is the only way to protect the bottom line. The global monopoly of taste. As we look at the landscape of the Australian steakhouse, we must acknowledge the final, most hidden truth: the consolidation of power. A few massive entities, JBS, Taze Australia, and NH Foods, control the vast majority of the processing capacity. These are the shadow kings of the industry. They dictate the prices, they set the standards, and they decide which brands live or die. Even the most independent steakhouse is, in many ways, a franchise of this global meat industrial complex. They are the final link in a chain that spans continents and involves trillions of dollars in trade. The exposure is that the choice we think we have as consumers is largely an illusion. We are choosing between different wrappers on the same fundamental product, managed by the same global titans. The future of the feast. So, where does this leave the diner? The Australian steakhouse is not going away. Our primal craving for the flame and the fat is too deeply encoded in our DNA. But the era of blind consumption is over. The magnate's media lens allows us to see the industry for what it truly is: a brilliant, high-stakes, and often cutthroat business that thrives on the tension between the rustic dream and the corporate reality. The next time you sit down in that leather booth, hear the hiss of the grill, and feel the weight of the silver in your hand, remember that you are a participant in a grand theatre. Enjoy the steak. It is likely world-class, but never forget the machinery that brought it to your table. In the world of premium dining, the most important thing to keep sharp isn't your knife, it's your perspective. Because in the end, the sizzle isn't just the sound of fat hitting the fire, it's the sound of a billion-dollar industry making sure you keep coming back for more. If this surprised you, wait until you see what's next. Subscribe to Jake States.